So thank you again, welcome. And I do want to say a few words. Actually, I don't. I just want to say thank you to all of you, because without you, this would not be possible. It's the amazing community, it's amazing people that come to this conference and all of your support. So once again, thank you. Give yourself a round of applause. I also want to remind you, please, to vote. We've extended the window of 15 minutes to make it a little bit longer. We did that without having any impact whatsoever on the application. The fact that you lost your favorites had nothing to do with it. We do, yes. So we don't really do mobile apps, you know. Anyway, welcome to this closing panel. The idea in this closing panel, just like last year, is that you ask questions. We have a microphone in the middle. The idea is, it's right here, right in the front. The idea is that you stand up and you ask questions there. That way we have an orderly queue. I would rather that you have questions asked live, and we'll do some that have been asked on Twitter. Or if you've asked on Twitter, you're more than welcome to ask here. We've got a wonderful panel of 14 people, and we couldn't put 20 because there's no more space. The idea is that we've got everyone from different backgrounds, different specialities, so quite diverse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each person to quickly say their name, introduce in less than 5 seconds what you do. Like, keep it really, really short, okay, because we don't have a lot of time. And they need to catch a train. You need to catch a flight today? Okay, ignore they said no, just keep it short. Right, so ask some interesting questions. What I do ask, though, please, it's been a very, very long conference. Everyone's tired. Everyone here is also tired. So make sure that the questions are as difficult and controversial as possible. No easy questions, right? And while they're introducing yourself, do feel free to start queuing up and asking some questions. Come on. We might even give out prizes. That might encourage you. Certainly, you didn't vote without prizes. Right, Sveta, start. Keep the microphone close to your mouth.
Hi all, I'm Svetlana Isakova. I'm a developer advocate at JetBrains and also co-author of Kotlin Action and Atomic Kotlin books. And check the Coursera course.
I said keep it short.
Thank you. Sorry.
Hello, I'm Roman Yelzarov. I do Coroutines in the Kotlin team.
Hi, I'm Nat Price. I'm a technical lead at Springer Nature, and we make a lot of use of Kotlin on the server side.
Hi, I'm Christina Lee, and I am an Android engineer at Pinterest.
Hello, I'm Max Shafirov. I'm CEO of JetBrains.
I'm Andrei Breslov. I do Kotlin.
Oh, that's an understatement.
Hi, my name is Amanda Hinchman Dominguez, and I'm a software engineer at Yellow.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Van Gogh. I'm the manager of the Android compiler team at Google, and I'm also on the language committee for the Kotlin Foundation.
Hi, I'm Quinta Dow, and I work on the Trello Android app for Atlassian.
Hi, I'm Kevin Galgan. I run a company called TouchLab, and I do a lot of Kotlin native stuff.
Jake Wharton. I work at Google on Android.
Venkat Subramaniam. I live in airplanes.
Sébastien Deleuze from Pivotal. I work on the support for Kotlin on all Sprint projects.
Hi, I'm William Cook. I'm a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm on the language committee.
And I'm Hadi, and I just found a small bottle of liquor on here, which is going to make this really, really awesome. Is that yours? Well, it's not anymore. Sit down. Go away. OK, so first question.
Thanks for the awesome conference. Really, I liked it. So when can we expect 1.3? And can you talk a little bit about the goals after 1.3?
Well, I guess that's Andre, right?
OK. So speaking of when, soon, like really soon, you know. And speaking of after 1.3, well, keep working on what we have. We have like a huge backlog of turning experimental features into stable features, improving here and there, like we'll invest a lot into performance, for example. And multi-platform, of course, and native are big priorities for us. So keep all the existing stuff going, plus I told you about the compiler API at the keynote. So that will be probably one of the biggest things for the next release cycle.
Anton.
Can I ask? I have a curiosity. We have so many Kotlin native talks, so when will Kotlin for JVM will be abandoned?
Okay, I guess this one is for me too, right? So as soon as the JVM is abandoned by the humanity.
As soon as what?
Well, sorry, not JVM only. It's JVM plus all the other virtual machines that run JVM bytecode.
So never. Just in case someone didn't understand. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm David. I do a lot of Kotlin on backend, but I also do a lot of Angular on the front end. Is there any chance that Kotlin will be supporting Angular, or Angular will be supporting Kotlin instead of TypeScript?
So, yeah, go ahead.
You wanted your JavaScript joke now?
I'm not allowed to say any more JavaScript jokes. As of today, does anybody want me to stop saying JavaScript jokes?
You can use your last chance for the bitch.
Oh, you see that? They say no. Go ahead.
So we've experimented with the React for now, and I've never heard anyone working on Angular ports, but whenever you can try.
I can add a little bit. Actually, someone on the Kotlin team was experimenting with Angular. Looks like with the new versions, there will be more opportunities for integration, so we're looking into that. But I haven't heard about anybody on the Angular side to be looking into Kotlin. Maybe they are, but they haven't told us.
Yeah, that would be an effort also on their side, probably.
Maybe something to add on that topic, because I'm also interested in front-end development. I really think that for front-ends, a dedicated Kotlin ecosystem for front-end needs to arise. So what I have been discussing with the Kotlin JS team, and maybe also for Kotlin native plus WebAssembly, that I try to push, is have the possibility to have dedicated Kotlin front-end framework that maybe will get the same principle that Vue.js or Angular or other framework like that, but does not rely on JS interoperability. So I really would like that arise from the community. Maybe there is some work on JetBrains side, but if that could arise from the community. So if anybody is interested about porting, I know there is already effort to port Vue.js to Kotlin or things like that, but something really first class, especially on Kotlin JS and Kotlin native plus WebAssembly, that would be super nice to see that arrive.
Thanks. Also, if I may add that Kotlin is open source, and open source doesn't mean just free. It means that you can contribute.
Okay, thanks.
So I want to ask, what is your most favorite language feature?
Oh, that's a good question.
Apart from extension functions, because talking to people, everyone says extension functions, so that is excluded. And what is your least favorite language if you have to delete a feature?
Jeffrey, for the record, I did not plan this. Is anybody going to ask what's your favorite book? No, I'm joking. Okay, let's start with Sveta. What's your favorite and least favorite? Your favorite? Well, tell the audience, not just.
Coroutines.
Least.
And your least favorite? Feature. It's okay, Andre, cover your ears.
Companions, probably.
No, of course, my most favorite feature are coroutines. If you exclude extension functions, of course. Least favorite, I really don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe companions too, but that's I'm divided there.
My favorite feature is nothing. least favorite is probably late in it.
This won't come as a surprise to anybody who attended my talk, but my favorite feature is sealed classes. Shocking. And I would say I'm going to cop out on the least favorite a little bit and say that my least favorite thing is the lack of truly like immutable concepts. So.
Well, my favorite feature is how everything fits together. Yeah, probably the one that fits least of all is delegation by interface. Implementation by delegation.
Okay, so you stole my least favorite. Yeah, so my favorite feature is functions.
Are we going to let him get away with that?
Well, I mean, honestly, it is. And top-level functions, by the way, are a very good thing that we have. I really hate inheritance by delegation. So seconding that, yeah.
To kind of write off that, my favorite Kotlin feature are lambdas with receivers, but I'm really, really salty about the fact there's no more ternary operators.
So my current favorite feature is the inline classes. That's still experimental. And then my least favorite one is late init properties. I think like, they're just not quite done right.
So I'm going to cheat on this one a little bit, but because it's not released yet. But actually, my new favorite feature is contracts. And I don't know, I'm not that original. I think late init is also like probably my least favorite feature.
I'm going to say probably coroutines is my favorite, or at least anticipated favorite, because my least favorite is that multi-threaded is not ready for native. So there you go.
I think my favorite would have to be elevating nullability into the type system, and then everything that comes after that with like smart casting and the enhanced inference. My least favorite is public by default.
My most favorite is where you can, with type safety, do object receivers. That was really impressive in my opinion. My least favorite is when features surprise you and behave different than you expect them to be. For example, a few quirks in the way delegates are implemented.
My favorite is reified type parameters to avoid some issues that you usually have in Java. And my least favorite was fixed in Kotlin 1.2. It was annotation array attributes, and Andre and others fixed that. So thanks for taking into account the feedbacks.
Oh, I don't know. I think the type system itself, I would sort of say is my favorite feature, and everything about it. And then least favorite feature, maybe the way that overloading works or sort of doesn't work.
Okay.
We'll see. The jury's still out on that.
Thank you.
So I'm going to take one question from Twitter. If you could just wait there, don't worry. So this one is from Dusko Bajic.
That's me, actually.
I didn't plan this. I literally don't even see you. Are you going to ask the same thing?
Yeah, that was the first question, actually.
Okay.
And I have the second one. So
okay, so, well, you don't get two. Hold on. I never said you get two questions. It's a lot of people. Okay, and this one I want to ask Jake. Jake, what are the chances, Dusko asked, what are the chances of Kotlin and Flutter?
Trying to get me fired, Hayden? I mean, it's actually really easy to answer because I work on the Android team and Flutter comes from not the Android team, so that would be their decision.
A little bit unsatisfied, but okay.
Wait, first of all, we never said that you're going to get satisfaction with your questions. We just said ask them.
Well, there is an ongoing discussion on Reddit regarding Kotlin native and Flutter because a lot of developers would like to see actually replacing Dart, but I guess that doesn't happen. However, I'd like to ask the second question as well, targeting Jake. Well, we'll know the work with Eric Java that you did in the past, and now you're quite concentrated on coroutines. So what would be actually your choice for now that 1.3 is at the door?
So coroutines don't entirely model all the things that you can model with RX currently, at least. Coroutines are a more fundamental primitive that you can then build on top of. So you could take coroutines and actually swap it in behind the existing RxJava API, and it would work exactly the same. So I definitely think that the use for something like single, maybe, and completable is completely obviated by suspension functions and nullability in the type system, because that just provides a better programming experience. Channels definitely don't supplant observable. They don't model the same concepts. They're much more like subjects. Now there is a issue tracking a potential future type in the coroutines companion library that might model something similar to observable. But until that, you really have no other choice if you need that specific behavior. But the reason I tend to trend toward coroutines is because I really like the multi-platform aspect of them and the ability to then use that code on multiple platforms. RX is obviously tied to Java and the JVM.
Thank you. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you on this conference. It was a great work, and applause to you.
Thank you. Despite not getting satisfied with your answer. Okay. One sec. I'm going to ask a real question from Twitter, because I know it's not. Oh, OK, wait a minute. Are you by chance called Agashi?
That's OK.
OK. So question is, so Kotlin is skewed towards Java developers, and you hear the phrase Java developers all over the conference. What's the community support for total beginners? Like, what's the commitment to flatten out the learning curve for newbie programmers? Sveta, I think that you have something around that.
Atomic Kotlin.
There you go. That was easy.
Thank you. Now I learned to do it short.
OK. When I said keep it short, I didn't really mean like that short. OK. Next question.
OK, hi. I'd like to ask about the Kotlin native concurrency and memory model. I understand the reason behind the decision you made, but I'm worried that it might slow down the adoption of Kotlin native, especially for iOS, because it's a very different model from everything that's done on iOS, and because most of the libraries that could be ported on Kotlin native comes from the Java world, where thread is expected and shared mutable structures, although very bad, are kind of the norm. So I'm very worried that these choices will very much slow down the adoption of Kotlin native.
Oh, I can only speak from my experience of going through those emotions when I first started. Yeah, it starts off with like, I'll just take my Java thing and make it work on native, and it doesn't work. And then it's really kind of daunting, and that was my big concern. But I would say certainly it will slow down, but it also, you kind of get your head around it and you figure it out, and then it's certainly doable. And I think that that's only going to improve as libraries become more mature. So yes, it'll slow it down. It's probably better in the long run, considering they're trying to make a change intentionally, but we'll also see.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
It's like, yeah, true, but the alternative is then they don't get to fix anything. So.
Thank you.
Right, I'm going to take next question. Yes.
Regarding platforms, there was also a question during the conference, will there be a Kotlin for GPUs, GPU programming?
Possibly. Okay, so well, we are not actively working on anything in this direction. It could be an interesting extension to existing backends. It doesn't have to be a separate language. I mean, separate backend for the language. So we'll see, but currently we are focus on different things.
Okay. Can I ask a second one?
No, you can't. Go away, Michael. Okay, I have a question here now online, and this is this is about coroutines. So I don't want Roman to say anything because, well, you're not biased or anything, but you know, as someone that's worked with RX, futures, coroutines, what is your opinion, Venkat, on the different things and where would you use what, and coroutines all the way or not all the way?
I think it depends on the context. So RX is great when you're trying to really stream data. And when you are talking to maybe an IoT device and you want to really pull data that might be going for maybe a few seconds to several minutes to even hours, coroutines are a very different mechanism. So I don't think they actually are quite interchangeable in that regard. So you could mix them together in some context, but they're pretty distinctive in a lot of different ways.
Okay, next question.
Hello. So I wanted to ask if there is any plan to invest more time or resources in Dokka, considering that it is kind of far behind of JavaDoc, and if you're using a library that has already documentation that with Java, and then you are trying to get Kotlin there, it's kind of a struggle at the moment.
Yeah, I had in fact the same question, so thanks.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. Yeah, well, of course, keep working on Dokka. It's been behind. Sorry about that. We'll make it catch up well with the multi-platform too, because it's now double difficult with different platforms, and this is in part, but distracting resources from the parity with JavaDoc. So we'll keep working on it.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Zainullah. So I have two parts in my question. The first would be for Andre, and the second would be for anybody. So how did you came up with an idea for Kotlin in this world, for example, where you have a lot of different languages, programming languages, I mean, of course. How did you came up with that idea?
Actually, it's a question from Max, not from me.
Okay. So, sorry.
And before he answers, I wish they had asked that when someone came up with JavaScript.
Well, you know, it's quite natural for JetBrains to do a language because we support so many languages in the IDEs, and so we know the highs and lows of so many languages, and we always thought like, why there isn't a single language that made right, and made right most means for us at that point it should be toolable and should be type safe and should be pragmatic. So how we come up with idea is quite clear, but maybe worth noting that we managed to push that idea to people. For instance, to Andre.
Yeah, actually, I bought the idea after about 2 hours of conversation, which is very, very fast.
Great.
I'm going to let you second questions because it's not, so it's for more people on the panel. Michael, don't feel bad that I didn't let you, but go ahead.
Okay, thank you for that. The second question is pretty general. So being a starter, so I don't have a lot of experience in software programming languages, but yeah, 2-3 years I would say. What's your advice for the people who have new ideas and who are really afraid of doing that will be failed or something like that?
Hi, really glad you answered that question. I started Kotlin literally 1 year ago, and the best thing to do is to go on the Slack link channel, the Kotlin link channel for Slack. When I went on there, I asked questions, and I was like half expecting just to, get completely destroyed. but people were really, really welcoming. And honestly, that's why Kotlin is a really strong language. It's because the community is really, really inclusive. And if you're looking for a great framework to start with as a beginner language, beginner framework for Kotlin, I highly recommend Tornado FX. The payoff is really, really quick, and there's very, very few words to write.
Product placement.
Thank you very much.
And by the way, that welcoming community includes all of you. So thank you.
Okay, I'm from Indonesia, a faraway country. Hello, Mr. Jack. Been using your libraries. I think everybody knows OkHttp, Retrofit, Butterknife, Dagger, Glide, and Android KTX. Yeah, they are cool. So my question is, why didn't you wear the KotlinConf lanyard during the event? No, not that. I mean, is there something new you're coming up in next year or this year? Some new library maybe?
Jake, right? Go ahead.
Are you asking what's coming in the next year?
Yeah.
Honestly, the stuff that I work on changes week to week. One of the things I am working on that I guess we can kind of talk about is that the current thing I'm doing is working to actually stabilize the parcelized support in the compiler, so it will no longer be experimental. It'll be a feature that's stable. And then beyond that, I'm not sure. I mean, we have a bunch of people that are now contributing to KTX across all the Android X libraries, and we continue to look at ways that we can make both the framework and the libraries work better, and the IDE, and all the tools really, to work better for all Android developers. So
stabilizing here.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have a question from online, and I'm going to dedicate this to the two main. I think Christina, Hyun, you're both Android developers. I mean, I think no. So I'm wondering if there's any official or preferred way to perform unit and instrumented tests in Android on Kotlin, not open classes, without using PowerMock or PowerMockito. What? You didn't hear the question? Well, no, it was hard. Oh. Is there any official way? Of course, you can say unofficial. What is your preferred way to do unit testing and instrumented tests in Android on Kotlin, not open classes, without using PowerMockito or PowerMock?
Well, I guess I can start. We understand this problem. We have it at Pinterest as well, and we have some legacy usage of PowerMock ourselves. The way that I personally get around it, I don't know if this is the one true answer, is that I pull things into interfaces, and this doesn't require me to open up classes. So if everything's in an interface, I can test against the interface, and you don't need something like PowerMock in that case. So that's my go-to. I don't know if Wynn has any other additional insight there.
No, actually, I think it's something that we've actually very recently discussed, but I think we are leading to similarly, ditto, I guess is my answer, but yeah.
Great. Next question.
It's actually also for Android devs. How have coroutines impacted your architecture, or how do you hope coroutines will impact your architecture going forward?
I think it's going to have a substantial impact when it comes to where we are moving overall in our industry. More and more, we are looking at building small services that communicate and interact asynchronously. This is something that really surprises me because, in a way, I would argue on the JVM we have gone in a different direction than where the world is headed. And so I think moving forward, asynchrony is going to play a very important role in what we do than parallelism. And so I think this is going to have a very substantial impact. In fact, the JVM itself, Java itself is moving in this direction. They are introducing the fibers and continuations in, I don't know, Java 19 or something like that. But when that happens, we'll have a much bigger impact in its adoption. That's one of the things that really excites me is because languages like Kotlin is at least a decade ahead of the curve when it comes to Java. So if you are getting excited about coroutines, if you're getting excited about asynchrony, you are really heading in the right direction. So I'm absolutely fascinated by that.
And If I could add on to the last part of your question, which is what do we hope for Android with things like coroutines? To be quite honest, for me, it's organizational bliss. That's what I'm hoping for, because I think anybody who's introduced RX at a very large organization understands how painful that can be, not just for the person trying to introduce it and trying to lobby for it, but for the people learning it and getting burned by it. And every time you go to a coroutines talk, you see that code that looks so familiar to what you're writing. And my big hope for us as Android developers is that this is one less pain point that we'll have in some scenarios. As Jake covered before, it doesn't replace everything that we have right now, but if we can pull pain out of like these 5 different situations, I'm all for it, because we have so many other things to learn and keep up with.
Okay.
If I can just add to that real quick.
Sure.
I mean, I agree with both of these points. I think the most interesting thing of coroutines is not actually the libraries and APIs themselves, because they don't provide anything that can't be done with RX or Futures or any of the other asynchrony libraries. The biggest advantage coroutines has is they have a language on their side, and they have the ability to put things into the language, which they already have through like extension functions, and really the only thing they had to add was the suspend keyword, and that really takes dealing with asynchrony to the next level. So that, you know, asynchrony is like a fundamental thing in every Android app. It's always been there, and coroutines aren't doing anything. I mean, Roman might not like me saying this. They're not doing anything that can't be done elsewhere. It's the fact that it comes with the language and the value add of the language that really makes the sum greater than the parts.
Thanks.
Right, I have a question, and this is for you, Will. So I'm a firm believer in Kotlin. I like it. I mean, maybe you could tell. But how do we get more people in academia to start with Kotlin?
That's a great question.
I know, I asked it.
I am probably the only professor at UT who's ever heard of Kotlin. So I guess that I'm going to have to write a paper. That's what I do as a professor.
So one of the things I do is I've been teaching for 30 years part-time at University of Houston. I don't live there. But one of the things I did about maybe 3-4 years ago is I realized that most universities are doing this wrong, where they are trying to teach students either Java or C++. So I went to the department and I said, I want to do a course where students coming out will firmly believe there's no one way to do things. And so what I do is I offer students to write code in 3 different languages within 2 weeks with full unit testing. And I don't tell them what language to use, but I place constraints on what they can use. And about, I'm going to say 1/5 of the students actually have been using Kotlin for about 2 years now. And they get just drawn into it, and they write automated testing with it, and they seem to enjoy it. And then I ask them at the end of the semester to compare languages they have used, and then they write about what they like about it, and clearly I can see the favor towards some of these languages. So I think a lot of times the answer is to really give the opportunity for the students to say, go do what you like, rather than telling them what exactly to do, and then they find their way.
Good. Thank you. Next question.
All right. Hi, everyone. I have a question regarding to the Kotlin tie system. Even though I love Kotlin tie system, I think there is one scenario that I think Kotlin tie system cannot represent of. One example is the double optional. The practical usage of double optional is the map that actually have a value as an optional, but we don't have a way to represent whether that exists or not. So maybe I'm too crazy about it, but I would love to hear whether how can we improve on that.
Nat, you want to?
Well, I mean, right now you would have to represent that as a data class with an optional field, so that you knew whether you got a data class with an optional field out of it, and you knew whether the optional field was there or not. So you can represent it, but it's not representable because you can't have an optional, right? You can't have a question mark, right? just the way it is. We can work around it. Maybe inline classes will help. I don't know.
Yeah, inline classes might actually help. But yeah, I second Nat's point. You can represent it with just a class. So the type system allows you to do this. It's not built in, and I think it's a good thing, actually.
All right, thank you.
Go ahead.
Hi, Alberto here. So over these years, we saw Kotlin growing up in the JVM. We saw it transpiling to JavaScript, running native. We have seen how it becomes an official language for Android, how it's accepted by Gradle. So we already talked about GPUs, but what's the next platform? What's the next steps?
Well, I think we are pretty good with platforms at the moment.
I want more.
Yeah.
Always more.
I would imagine that some more native platforms may be supported by Kotlin Native over time, but it's there was no urgent need that I see so far. So yeah, we are not actively seeking new platforms now, and not even new paradigms. So we're trying to stop the, well, we're not trying to stop. We are putting off the extensive part of the growth and going the intensive way more.
Okay, thanks.
Question from online. I guess this is for you, Sebastian. The question is Spring Foo. Does that mean that we should drop Spring Boot and go with Spring Foo? Is Spring Boot now like the old XML? Like.
Okay, good question. So Spring Foo is an incubator for various things. Coroutine support that will end up next year in Spring Framework 5.2 if we have cold stream support. Jake was talking about that. Officially supported, that means for Spring Data, MongoDB, but also all the reactive SQL stuff that are coming, we are going to provide a coroutine API on top of that. So this is also part of Spring Foo, this coroutine support that is currently incubating. There is also this new model to configure Spring Boot infrastructure. So Spring Boot is currently based on auto-configuration, annotations, and that's perfectly fine. What I'm just providing with Spring Foo is incubating a new way, a more explicit way to configure your application with a Kotlin DSL without anything that is enabled via class path detection or auto-configuration. And it seems to me more Kotlinish to do that. I will also provide a Java DSL to do the same. Even I think that Java developers will continue to use the same annotation-based programming model. So it's not better, it's not worse. Spring is about providing choice. And my goal is to be able to provide this option, configuring Spring Boot application in an explicit way with the Kotlin DSL, and leveraging the functional bin configuration that allow to go faster, consume less memory. We don't need anymore this Spring plugin to automatically open the classes, so it feels to me more natively designed for Kotlin. So to provide that as a production-ready option, and we are not sure yet if that will be integrated as a declarative flavor in Spring Boot, if that will be outside of, we are not sure about the outcome yet. But it's so really not about providing a replacement for Spring Boot based on annotation, more providing a more Kotlin way of configuring.
Okay, so when you say incubator, is that the equivalent of our experimental, or is it kind of like use at will and we might kill it off?
So currently the release version is 0.0.2. So it's quite new. So the coroutine support will incubate and will be production ready next year. About the configuration model, it will take a little bit more time, but I will work super hard on that. We have already 10 external contributors, so I think things are moving pretty fast, and there is also a lot of interest behind being able to run Kotlin applications that run with all the JVM ecosystem, but are running as a native executable compiled by GraalVM substrate native image capabilities. So basically, you keep the existing JVM ecosystem, but you run statically linked executable like in Go. So that's an alternative way of going native than Kotlin native, which has other goals.
Okay.
So yeah,
okay.
We are going to provide things like that.
Thank you. Next.
Hi. I wanted to ask, so with the advent of the Gradle Kotlin DSL like nearing prime time,
plugin developers are going to start adding Kotlin DSL support. And currently the least invasive way to add support for, if you have a huge plugin for Gradle, is through extension functions to kind of shim it over to what is the Kotlin DSL. The problem with that currently is that if your plugin is entirely written in Groovy and you add a Kotlin module that depends on the Groovy part, so whether it's a separate module, a composite build, or even another source set in the same module, you get a cyclic dependency issue between compile Groovy, compile Java, compile Kotlin, compile Java. There's a really, really hacky way around it that actually causes the compiler to scream at you in all caps, but it will compile and run. But I'm wondering if there's plans to kind of address that so that there's better adoption of Kotlin DSL.
Well, honestly, I'd be happy to see this done by somebody else. Well, I think, yeah, we should discuss this with Gradle folks because it's a pretty specific use case. Probably we don't need a full-blown Groovy interop. But it's an open question, so nobody was taking this seriously before, and thanks for raising. We'll see.
Cool. Thank you.
Go ahead. Yeah. And I think with the ones that are standing now, we're done because we've got a bunch more here, so please don't join any more in the queue. Go ahead.
Hi. I wanted to ask about dependency injection as a first-class citizen in Kotlin. And how, any thoughts about improving how to test stuff and mocking in the Kotlin pragmatic way?
Well, regarding adding DI to the language, we did consider it at some point pretty early on. Didn't find any good solutions, so it's on the shelf. Regarding improvements to testing, there is nothing specific we're looking into for this, but we're working on the scripting. And there's been a lot of improvements for things like the spec library for testing. So many things can come from that way.
Type classes?
Maybe.
That's 3 questions. I'm just going to say that.
Just saying.
Type classes.
Maybe. Well, actually, I do want type classes in Kotlin, but I'm not sure it's going to happen soon.
And just to add, dependency injection is so 2016. You don't need it anymore. Go ahead.
Hey, panel. My name is Mod. I'm an Android developer at Deliveroo. For the past year and a half, I've been working a lot in multi-module projects. I find I have to keep marking my classes as internal. Will I ever have a choice to be internal by default?
Well, regarding the choice, we are a little reluctant to make a language, tunable in this sense, like pick your own defaults and your own configuration because, well, fragment the ecosystem. So probably not. Yeah, and you can have this, like the functionality that will help you design your APIs as an ID inspection. And I think it is already there, if I'm not mistaken. And you can simply turn it on.
Question online. What is preventing, and this is something that anybody can actually answer if you want your input. I'm going to start giving an answer myself because I've got the mic. What is preventing Kotlin to hit the TIOBE 1020 mark? My answer is, who cares about TIOBE index? But anyway, if anyone else has any opinion on that.
I have advice. Like, look what TIOBE is actually measuring and try to make any sense of it.
Yeah, so the point there is that it's measuring problems that people have with the language. And so
Look,
that doesn't necessarily correlate with the best language. So I would look at a different metric, there are lots of different companies that have language statistics. So choose a different one.
I know that in London, Kotlin has had a very big take-up in industries that don't normally talk about what they do. So banking, fintech, and they're not going to be talking about the systems they've built in Kotlin, the systems, even the technologies they use. So the actual take-up of the language could be, very different from the public appearance of the take-up of the language.
I wanted to add if I can. Well, it's a fun about TIOBE not measuring anything, that's true. But I think that topic itself, the question itself, is actually important because there are many people who measure if the language is viable for them to use by using various various rankings. And so I wish you, all of you here, educate those people that they are actually checking wrong sources.
So the real question should actually be, how can we come up with an index which is reflecting adoption from those companies that don't want to say they're adopting it? And then make a beautiful white paper that you can shift to your decision makers and say, there, you see? It's on 2 on this index.
That's a topic for a very nice academic paper, I think.
Will? You said you want to write a paper.
Maybe I'll write it.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm an Android developer who is seeing a lot of interest in functional programming. My question is, how many of you are actually using functional programming with Android, primarily speaking, let's say, Arrow? And if yes, then what would be your recommended, let's say, advice or approach for devs like a lot of us who didn't have functional programming background, like theoretical background?
So go ahead. Anyone?
I mean, functional programming is a spectrum, right? Kotlin, by its very nature of having top-level functions, gives you functional programming at some very elemental form. And then really it's just how far you want to go to Haskell ridiculousness of trying to adopt that into Kotlin language. But yeah, I think Kotlin sort of forces you by both having extension functions and top-level functions where you tend to adopt it in some form no matter what, and your code base gets better for it. And I don't think you have to turn to something like Arrow. But if you have that knowledge and you want those features, it's there, but it doesn't have to be, the entirety of it doesn't have to be in the standard library or language, which is similar to the option point earlier. One of the best parts about Kotlin is how small they're attempting to keep it and how many things you can just build yourself. So
I will say that it's kind of worked out that I actually ended up talking to Raul and Jorge from 47 Degrees earlier this week, and I kind of asked a similar question, just because I feel like some of the kind of headier concepts of functional programming are really intimidating. I mean, we all know the M word that most of us can't define. And I actually asked, well, how do you get started with Arrow? And Jorge or Raul, if you're in the room, yell at me if I'm getting this wrong, but they've actually broken down a lot of the kind of functional programming concepts into different artifacts. And so I actually asked that, and I think Jorge said, you can pick one of the artifacts, download it, and start working with it. It's not like you have Arrow as a whole. You can kind of pick one concept that you're interested in and kind of just start using that as a starting point.
So to kind of build on to that, a lot of us started out, when we started Kotlin, a lot of us came from a Java background, and talking with a lot of other Kotliners, a lot of us kind of went through this journey together where we start writing essentially Java only in Kotlin, and that's definitely what I did. I'd say the best way to get started on learning functional programming is asking others to review your code, and you do the same for them. People trade really, really cool tricks and tips, and this is how I learned functional programming. And it was really fun because I initially rejected these functional aspects in Ruby and Haskell. When I first learned that, I was just like, you know what, Jesus, take the wheel, because I'm not, I'm not going to learn this. So the best way is to ask people to review your code, and you look at their code.
Yeah, I'd like to add that a lot of people who do hardcore functional programming, they try to make the most succinct code and use the craziest patterns. Don't bother doing it. I think ties into what Andre said during the keynote. Make sure your code is readable and use the thing that looks the best, and do that. Don't do functional just to do functional. Make it readable. That's the most important.
certainly when we adopted Scala, we went through that writing Java. Sorry, not Scala. When we adopted Kotlin, we went through the sort of phase of writing, we went through the phase of writing Java and Kotlin syntax. But then we had Scala programmers on the team. They pushed it to writing Scala in Kotlin syntax, and that doesn't work either. And Kotlin there's a grain to the language. There are things that work well in the language, and there are things that started getting painful. Just be aware of that. There is a happy medium that I find very pleasant to code in, fits my head, and it's somewhere between the extremes of Java and Scala and Haskell.
So I'm really, really glad that you brought in the functional people part, because I actually took a friend who happened to be a Haskell guru to a local Chicago Kotlin user group. It was very exciting. And he was looking at all the Kotlin features, and he kind of slacks me, and he's like, these are really, really cool features that Kotlin has, but they stole it all from Haskell. And I just love how Kotlin is essentially the evolution of all these amazing, great ideas, and functional and object-oriented can finally meet in the middle. So this is exciting.
So one of the challenges really is it's not about the code or the library. It is really to shift the paradigm in our mind and think functionally. And honestly, that takes a lot of effort. And in a way, I would say it's really incremental. We get better at it as we do it more and more. So I would say the first step is to really start asking the question, how would it transform? Thinking about transformation of data rather than mutation of data, that's been helpful for me, is to say, what if I think about this as a flow of data rather than taking the data as a state and then mutating it, and then working our way from there. Sometimes I would say, I get it in 5 minutes. For another problem, I might spend 3-4 hours to really figure it out. And that's okay, I think. It's important to really invest the time and get better at it. And then I think if we do it consistently for several months, I think we are better than when we started. And like you said, having somebody review the code and critique it. And oftentimes this happens. I would write a code and go to somebody and say, hey, how does this look? And they may even, the concept of rubber ducking, right? The fact that you're going to ask somebody to look at your code forces you to think differently than you would otherwise. And I think it's just an incremental improvement on what we do. And to know that it actually is not just coding, but also thinking differently, that makes a difference.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add anything?
Well,
Will?
I feel like there's going to be a confluence of objects and functional and concurrent programming and all these different ideas that, when you talk about functional programming in Kotlin, it's not the same as Haskell, right? Haskell is pure functional, no mutability at all. That's very different from what you're talking about in Kotlin. So I would say that, that functions, use of higher order functions and things like that is very natural to do with objects, and there's no incompatibility between them really. They're just two different sides of the same coin. And so I think that we're going to get kind of merged languages in the future. Look, you can do functions in Java now, right? So it's going to be able to support that level of functional programming, and that's going to make things more expressive. If that's what you need, then you use it. If you need objects, if you've got a big database, then you use objects, right? So just don't get hung up about this kind of battle between functional programming and object-oriented programming. I think we need to let go of that and just embrace them the way that Scala does, right? Scala has objects and functional, and Kotlin has that too, but it's simpler.
Right, one question online, and then you can go. Roman, I think this was probably for you. When will we have a multi-platform file API in the Kotlin standard library?
Oh, that's one of the things we'll be working on, but unfortunately fortunately, we won't have this in the Kotlin standard library because we're now trying to, because of the multi-platform nature, we're trying to keep only like the really common things in the standard library that everybody needs. And files are not for every platform. There are lots of platforms that don't have the concept of the file, but we'll definitely be adding some kind of additional file library that will be provided on the platforms that have the corresponding concept.
Thank you. Go ahead.
My question is for Maxime and the rest of JetBrains and everyone else of you that adopted Kotlin. We've heard all the great things about Kotlin, how much it's so much better than all the other things that we did. But what were your pain points when adopting Kotlin, and how did you solve them?
Well, I'm not the best case here because I used Kotlin since, I don't know, way before.
I mean, for the remainder of JetBrains, which is not in the Kotlin inner circle, but all the other folks.
Okay, so the largest pain point is build time. I think that's familiar for everyone here, but for instance, in the case of IntelliJ IDEA project, which we very much would like to use Kotlin more than we do now, it turns out that the more Kotlin you add, the less performant the build becomes, and the IDE becomes slow as well. And we currently working on fix that, and it's very important. Other than that, there are some glitches in tooling, specifically for JavaScript tooling. We would like to have more integration with just JavaScript framework for navigation, refactoring, and stuff like that, and also debugger and logging, all usual stuff.
And somehow related to that, there was a question online. How many products inside JetBrains currently use Kotlin in production?
Oh, that's going to be a long list. But anyway, the Kotlin, obviously. IntelliJ IDEA. TeamCity has Kotlin as DSL for configuring build configurations. UTrack has Kotlin both to use internal and for configuring rules. We based our CRM and license manager backend on Kotlin. What else? Rider.
Which is the .NET IDE written in Kotlin.
And last but not least, maybe we are currently working on a new project, which is huge, would say, system which has a backend and all three kinds of front ends, so web front end and two mobile platforms, as well as desktop application and IDE plugin. So we'll be using these multi-platform new features very extensively.
And for the record, that new project does keep your favorites.
Hello. My question is kind of continuation of the previous one. So I assume that when adopting Kotlin, you had to teach your colleagues and other people about Kotlin features and patterns. So to everyone, what was the hardest concept in Kotlin you had to explain to somebody? Maybe pattern, maybe feature, maybe a way of doing things. Thank you.
Someone not JetBrains, please.
I'll pick that up to start with. I think that one of the really great things about Kotlin is how easy it is to go. So we started with Java 8 and then moved to Kotlin, how easy it was to pick up. Right? The way of thinking about design was almost the same as Java 8, but just a bit more on the immutable stuff that Streams brought in. So a bit more on the functional, made it easier. So people picked it up, and it went like wildfire through the company. It really was a grassroots sort of revolution from the developers. It wasn't architects telling them, you know, we're going to change the language. It just, there's no way they could stop it, basically. And the only difficulties we had were in the few sort of like strange cases where it looks like Java but it acts differently, you know, like returns an expression, not a statement, and so you can put it inside an expression, and when you know, someone who's used to Java sees that, they're a bit taken aback. So, you know, those kind of things, right? But mostly it was a very easy transition.
Yeah, I'll go. We're actually a mobile development shop, so our first Kotlin was actually in mid-2014, so at that point, everything is kind of the hard thing to explain. But usually when we have new people start, we just point them at the Kotlin cones thing, and then it's just a gradual process of stopping to think in Java. You should use an extension function here. Wouldn't that make sense? Like, oh yeah. And even for myself, like, I had to come back to Kotlin after a couple of years, and it was just kind of that, thinking differently, I think, in general.
Yeah, for Android Studio, we're actually starting to write more and more of our own code in Kotlin as well. And I see different styles. Some people kind of write Java in Kotlin, and other people go all crazy using every Kotlin feature, and getting like some consistency in there is sometimes challenging.
Yeah, just to add to that, it's pretty easy to get started because the language feels very familiar. But then it's very easy to almost get like drunk on the power of Kotlin and go crazy with things like custom operators, and you wind up actually harming readability quite significantly because you feel like you need to use the language features. And so it can be challenging to tell people, or to try and teach people to show a little bit of restraint. And if anything, you want to opt for something that's more readable and potentially more verbose than something that's clever and uses a cool language feature, but winds up harming readability in the end.
I think one of the other challenges that also I would say is, on the surface, Kotlin looks very attractive. It's like, hey, I know Java, I can get in and start coding. But the real truth is that it's actually a really big language in a lot of different ways. I have to admit that I was pretty, fascinated and at the same time a bit scared with the so many features in the language. But just a case in point, a few weeks ago, I ran into an Android developer who has been using Kotlin for a while, and he was very curious to know how I would approach a particular design, and he started explaining it. And then along the way, he said, why are you doing it all this way? Why can't you use this feature? And then suddenly it's like, I've been using Kotlin for a while, didn't even know this can be done. And that's one of the things I'm realizing more and more, is the language is actually pretty big. And to know everything you can do in it actually takes quite a long time. And there's a learning curve, right? So you could ramp up pretty quickly, and then you realize that there's a steepness after that. So, and then it's important to really recognize that and then take the time to really ease into the language, then assume that it's actually, easy, and just be ready for it. Great. And we are perfect ending to the question because everyone participated. Yeah. So thank you so much. We are out of time. Once again, thank you for coming to the conference. I hope you enjoyed it. We will be sending you back wait a minute, don't clap yet. We will be sending back a survey form. Do fill it out. Please give us feedback. And we will soon be announcing KotlinConf 2019 and where it will be, but not today. Thank you and goodbye.